Jason Voorhees was born on June 13th as the only child of Pamela Voorhees and her husband, Elias. We know this because his mom says as much in the original Friday the 13th.
Jason was my son, and today is his birthday.
And we know the year was 1946 from This American Case File broadcast.
Born in 1946 to Elias and Pamela Voorhees, Jason was believed to have drowned in Camp Crystal Lake at the tender age of 11.
So Jason was born on a Saturday in universe, not a Friday, but more on that later. Now, it's a popular fan theory that Jason was born with a congenital condition called hydrocephalus, which caused him to have facial deformities. However, this is not a canonical fact from any Friday the 13th movie. It comes from this book, Crystal Lake Memories, where special makeup effects artist Tom Savini describes his thought process when creating the look for Jason. When I designed the look of Jason, I kept thinking of this guy I saw in my neighborhood when I was a kid. He had one eye and one ear that were lower than the other, like Quasimodo. Originally, we were thinking that Jason was going to have hair, but it just didn't look quite right. So we left him bald, as if he was like a hydrocephalic mongoloid pinhead or something. I also gave him more of a dome head for the final makeup. And we just went with that. We didn't do any tests or mock-ups at all. And that's been the look of Jason ever since. Hydrocephalus is a condition where fluid accumulates in the brain while a baby is in utero, leading to increased pressure and potential damage. But since there's no mention of this in the movies, it's up to you if you want to accept this explanation. However, he definitely did have facial deformities. He walked with a limp, and he was bullied as a result. Jason grew up in a large, off-the-beaten-path home in Crystal Lake, New Jersey. His parents didn't seem to be particularly smart. I mean, they misspelled their own last name on the mailbox, but it seems like they did at least have the common sense to keep Jason isolated from the kids that would most likely torture him. For example, they installed playground equipment in the front yard, which we can assume was a measure to keep him out of the public eye. It's also implied that he was homeschooled. But they could not hide their son from the world forever, especially after Elias abandoned the family for unknown reasons. Pamela would have to find a way to balance earning her own income and watching over Jason to make sure that he stayed out of trouble. On June 13th, 1957, Jason turned 11 years old, and it was time for him to interact with some other kids and join the real world. Pamela's solution was to get a job as a cook at the local summer camp at the nearby Camp Crystal Lake. I imagine her thought process was that she'd be able to work while also being near Jason, who could attend as a camper in case there were any issues. The one potential pitfall was that Jason could not swim, but as long as she informed all the counselors, he could just be excluded from these swimming-related activities until he learned how, you would think. I mean, that's what any reasonable person would do. In the summer of 1957, while Pamela was busy preparing meals, the other campers formed a mob around Jason and bullied him, chanting "freak show" and putting a bag around his head, instilling in him this sense of shame that his face should always be covered. The counselors were nearby, but they were too busy flirting with one another and getting busy in broad daylight to notice or care about the commotion. Unfortunately for Jason, it turned tragic when the other campers forced him onto the dock and pushed him into the lake, where he drowned.
The counselors weren't paying any attention. They were making love while that young boy drowned. His name was Jason.
I should note that Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, shows different footage of Jason drowning, where the incident takes place at night. But since this is part of a story being told secondhand, we can assume that this scene is just the imagination of the storyteller. Jason's body was never recovered from the lake, leading to rumors about him coming back from the dead and terrorizing the area.
And if you listen to the old timers in town, they'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature. Surviving in the wilderness. Full grown by now. Stalking. Stealing what he needs. Living off wild animals and vegetation.
Jason would indeed come back. And back. And back. And back. Each time more powerful than the last. To learn about the forces that gave Jason eternal life, how he impacted the design of goalie masks in our world, and the real purpose of the Jason Voorhees character, stick around to the end of this video. In the slasher genre, we have what is known as the Big Three. The soulless, immortal killer Michael Myers, afflicted with an ancient druid curse. The masochistic dream demon Freddy Krueger, enchanted by a trio of Greek deities. And finally, the undead, unrelenting killing machine Jason Voorhees, whose power to continually return from the grave comes from another 80s horror franchise? I'll explain that in a little bit. But first, welcome to horror history. Let me send you a postcard from the horror history classroom. Jason first appeared in the original Friday the 13th from 1980, but only briefly as a little kid. It wasn't until part 2 that he became the imposing killer that landed him in the Big Three. And it wasn't until the end of part 3 that he gained his signature hockey mask that everyone associates him with today. Like Pamela, parenting a kid with deep insecurities, the creators of the Friday the 13th franchise had to figure things out as they went. Thanks to the choice to name the franchise after a specific day and date that many of the movies take place on, it's possible to determine nearly every item on the timeline. But it's not as straightforward as you might think. To understand what allowed Jason to rise from his watery grave, we've got to first take it back to the aftermath of his tragic death. Following Jason's passing in 1957, Camp Crystal Lake gained a reputation as more incidents continued to occur.
Camp Crystal Lake has changed.
First, there were 2 counselors who were killed the following year in 1958, when they snuck away from the fireside song session for some alone time and were found stabbed to death. In 1962, the lake water was poisoned before the camp could open, and another year, wildfires extended the closure. But in 1979, a new owner would attempt to reopen the camp, only to see the bloodiest summer yet on record. On Friday, June 13th, 1979, counselors at Camp Crystal Lake were busy making last-second preparations for the reopening of the camp, not realizing that someone had an eye on them. A series of gruesome murders take place, including the cook who gets her throat slashed on the way to the lake, a counselor who gets his throat slashed investigating a stranger in one of the cabins, a couple who gets impaled with an arrow and chopped with an axe respectively after engaging in bedroom activities, a girl who becomes a human archery target, the camp owner who gets stabbed in the gut and hung in a tree, and one more counselor who somehow died and was later found pinned to the door of a cabin, which is probably impossible if he weighs like more than 20 pounds, but who knows? Maybe these are really sturdy arrows. However, none of this was the work of Jason, but rather of his mother, Pamela. First to get revenge on the counselors who neglected her boy, then to make sure nobody would suffer the same fate by sabotaging the camp so it could not open, and finally by killing anyone who did successfully try to reopen it, to send a message to future owners. But there's a reason I brought up all of Pamela's actions in an episode about Jason. When the last remaining counselor, Alice Rand, yes, her canonical name is Alice Rand, goes up against Pamela, she almost seems to channel the spirit of her deceased son, as if they're both living in her body.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her. Don't let her get away, Mommy. Don't let her live.
I won't, Jason. I won't.
There's no way of definitely knowing if she was really carrying Jason's spirit, or if she had just lost her mind and developed dissociative identity disorder as a means of coping with her son's death, but I believe that she really was channeling Jason's spirit because of this book found in the Voorhees house after her death. This is the Necronomicon, a grimoire or magic spellbook that was often referenced in the stories of horror author H.P. Lovecraft, first appearing in his short story The Hound, and later more notable works such as At the Mountains of Madness and The Call of Cthulhu. The Necronomicon, often referred to as the Book of the Dead, is described as containing forbidden and arcane knowledge, including spells and incantations that can summon powerful cosmic entities or open portals to other dimensions. Those who read the Necronomicon often face madness or worse, as the knowledge it contains is too much for the human mind to comprehend. This could explain Pamela's sudden change from apparently hireable cook to violent murderer. If she used a spell to bring back her dead boy, she may have advertently or inadvertently become the host of his soul inside her body. The appearance of the Necronomicon in Jason Goes to Hell resembles the appearance of the book in another iconic 80s horror franchise, The Evil Dead, where it's referred to as Necronomicon Ex Mortis, and used to summon deadites, which are evil spirits that have the ability to possess the bodies of any creature of flesh, living or dead. It's easy to see how a desperate, lonely, and stupid Pamela Voorhees may have turned to the occult as a last-ditch effort to save her son, and found an incantation in the Necronomicon that allowed her to bring him back, not realizing what the consequences would be. This is confirmed by Jason Goes to Hell director Adam Marcus in an interview with Horror Geek Life, which sounds more like your life. When asked about the possible Evil Dead connection, Marcus explains that he had the blessing from Evil Dead's creator Sam Raimi, stating, "Pamela makes a deal with the devil by reading from the Necronomicon to bring back her son. Jason Voorhees is a deadite. He's one of the Evil Dead." And while that's sure to ruffle the feathers of some diehard OG Friday fans, it does explain some of the nonsense that takes place throughout the series. Headcanon exists for a reason. You can always choose to regard or disregard whatever material you want in your own head. But in this video, all the movies are canon. After killing 7 Crystal Lake staff members in 1979, Pamela finds Alice Rand in a shed armed with a gun, and Jason's spirit eggs her on to kill this final girl as well. Alice chickens out with a gun, so it turns to hand-to-hand combat, and by that, I mean a lot of bitch slapping and a frying pan to Pamela's face. The struggle ends beside the lake, where Pamela tries to sneak up on Alice with the machete, a tool that would become a favorite of Jason's over the years, and Alice ultimately gets a hold of the blade, using it to decapitate the overprotective mother. Exhausted, Alice pushes a canoe out into the lake and sleeps there, only to find one more surprise waiting for her in the morning. Responding officers would find her in the lake and save her, but no evidence of Jason is ever found, even after this police sketch was published in the newspaper. But given what we know about Pamela carrying Jason's undead soul, the logical explanation is that when Pamela was killed, Jason's soul moved to the closest body that was available, which was Jason's original body, still lying at the bottom of the lake. As I mentioned, all of this took place on what would have been Jason's 33rd birthday, Friday, June 13th, 1979, with Alice's canoe incident being the following morning. We know the year because Pamela Voorhees' grave says that she died in 1979. The original Friday the 13th movie came out in 1980, so this creates a bit of confusion, because in real life, June 13th, 1980 was a Friday, but June 13th, 1979 was a Wednesday. To make things more confusing, the original movie states that it takes place on Friday, June 13, the present, leading many to believe that the present refers to the year of the movie's release, 1980. However, because of the very deliberate inclusion of this tombstone in part 4, I'm going to assume that the present actually refers to the year that the movie was filmed, 1979. This means that the weekdays in the movie universe are shifted 2 days sooner than the weekdays in our universe. In other words, if it's Friday the 13th in movie, it's Friday the 15th in real life. Remember that, it's going to be important. Although Alice survives her first encounter with Jason, she wouldn't get away for very long. The next confirmed date is 2 months later in August 1979.
The girl who survived that night at Camp Blood, that Friday the 13th, she claims she saw him. She disappeared 2 months later.
Jason would call her house to distract her, allowing him to sneak into her kitchen through the window and place his mother's head in the fridge. After Alice discovers his little gift, Jason, now a full-grown adult, grabs her from behind and stabs her in the temple with an ice pick, making it clear that this was his way of avenging his mother. Jason would move her body to a shack in the woods where he was building a shrine in Mrs. Voorhees' honor, and would continue to seek revenge on anyone who entered his wilderness. He seemed to be living out of this shack, hunting small animals, but it's not clear if he needed to eat to survive. It doesn't seem like he does. Although Jason's biggest killing sprees were saved for Friday the 13th, he did attack anyone he encountered, regardless of the date, probably in order to preserve his secrets. That seems to be what happens to Christine Higgins in the summer of 1982, 2 years before the events of Friday the 13th Part 3.
I know it's only been 2 years, but I feel like I've been away forever.
After getting in a fight with her parents, she ran away and hid out in the woods, where she fell asleep under an oak tree. Later, she was startled awake by what she described as a hideous, inhuman man with a knife. She was able to kick the knife out of his hands and run, but he caught her and dragged her away. Chris was unable to remember how she did it, but she did escape, though the incident scarred her for life.
I'll never forget that horrible face, never.
This would not be her last encounter with the Crystal Lake Killer, but first, there would be another attempt to open a summer camp on the sparkling New Jersey shore. They say time heals all wounds, and not only is that true for Jason, but also for the surrounding community of Camp Crystal Lake. While the old-timers had given up on trying to hold camp at the location due to a belief that the area was jinxed, there would always be a fresh set of young entrepreneurs who weren't afraid of the location's sordid history, seeing the stories as no more than campfire tales.
We're the first to return here. 5 years. 5 long years he's been dormant. And he's hungry.
That means the year was 1984, but remember, due to the calendar difference in the fictional world, if it's Friday the 13th in the movie, it's Friday the 15th in real life. There's only one Friday the 15th in 1984, and it lands in June. I researched a bunch of summer camp start dates and found that the average start date was in mid to late June, and the counselors would get there beforehand for what I assume is about a week of training. It starts one day before, on June 12th, 1984. I should also note that Camp Crystal Lake, where Jason drowned and Pamela lost her head, was closed down and roped off. So this new camp was set up next door on a property called the Packanack Lake region. Basically, Jason sees the counselors arrive, realizes they're just like the counselors who let him drown when he sees head counselor Paul making out with his girlfriend Ginny, and strangled this guy, Crazy Ralph, with a barbed wire. Crazy Ralph had been trying to warn the Packanack staff about the danger. So Jason took him out and hid him in a pantry. Many have wondered how Jason aged up so fast. If he still appeared as a kid in '79, why was he now a full-grown adult just 5 years later? I've never really questioned this much, seeing as how it's an 80s horror franchise where no filmmaker was afraid to change things in order to service whatever story they wanted to tell, but it's always been a huge talking point for fans, so sure, let's talk about it. I think there are 4 theories worth talking about. Theory number 1, Jason just continued aging after coming back from the dead. He drowned when he was 11, so he'd be 16 in 1984. Some 16-year-olds look like adults. When I went to summer camp as a kid, there was this one counselor that we assumed was like 25, but then we found out that he was 16. However, I've got to slash this theory because it doesn't take Jason's second encounter with Alice Rand or his first encounter with Christine Higgins into account. He's fully grown when he kills Alice, at which point he'd still be 11. Theory number 2, the multiple Jasons theory. This one posits that 49-year-old Pamela Voorhees couldn't have accomplished all of those killings by herself, so she possessed some random truck driver to help her. This one does have some interesting things going for it, like the fact that some of the kills in the original are done silently, but when we actually see Pamela, she seems to be incapable of shutting up about why she's doing what she's doing. However, as I got deeper into this one, I realized it was actually proposing that there are like 3 or 4 Jasons to explain the minute differences in Jason from movie to movie. The mental gymnastics get pretty strenuous, I'd say. The author even admits that it's a stretch halfway through. I'm slashing this one. Theory number 3, Jason never died. This theory is actually presented in universe by Ginny.
He'd be grown by now, right?
Right.
We can expand on it knowing what we know now. Maybe Jason was always invincible. After drowning in the lake, he just got up and marched right out that night, but nobody knew that he was alive. If that's the case, then Alice Rand's encounter with the child Jason must have just been a dream.
He must have seen the whole thing happen. He must have seen his mother get killed.
If you're willing to accept that Alice just fell out of her canoe during a dream, this is mostly a clean theory, but it doesn't do much to explain how Jason became invincible. So, theory number 4. It's magic. In the interview I mentioned earlier, where Adam Marcus explains the inclusion of the Necronomicon, he mentions that it always bothered him that Jason grows up so quickly, and he feels that Pamela's magic deal with the devil is what causes Jason to accelerate from a boy to a man in a couple of short months. Theories number 3 and number 4 can both work depending on what you believe. Remember what I said earlier about headcanon? If your personal headcanon is that only the movies with Friday the 13th in the title count, then you'd probably side with theory number 3. But since I'm considering everything in this video, I have to operate with theory number 4 in mind. But whichever you choose, it doesn't really affect anything later on. So the next day is the infamous Friday the 13th. Part of the fear around the date has to do with the superstition that Friday the 13th is bad luck. But where does that mentality actually come from? I don't know, so I decided to look it up. It's hard to know exactly when Friday the 13th became thought of as unlucky, but it likely comes from the Christian religion. Oh, come on. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I have nothing against the Christian religion, but I made this video a while ago about how there are just too many horror movies that are centered in that world. I call it religious horror. And ever since making that video, it feels like I just can't escape from it, no matter what topic I do. I did briefly mention Friday the 13th in that video because the 9th movie is Jason Goes to Hell, but I didn't know it went this deep. Apparently, they're superstitious about Friday the 13th because in the Christian Bible, Judas, who is said to have betrayed Jesus, was the 13th guest at the Last Supper, and many unfortunate things happened on Friday. This article from National Geographic also mentions that there may be a more logical reason that the number 13 is seen as cursed, because many things come in sets of 12, like 12 months in a year, or 12 eggs in a carton. So going beyond that is seen as uncanny. That still doesn't explain the Friday thing, but regardless of the origin, I think the reason that it's still seen as unlucky today is confirmation bias. It's such a widespread superstition that people are more likely to believe that something bad will happen on Friday the 13th, making it more likely for something bad to actually happen due to cognitive behavior. The same way that the positive power of belief can lead to the release of endorphins in the brain, research shows that negative beliefs can lead to negative physical symptoms. The other side of that is if something genuinely unlucky does happen on Friday the 13th, you're more likely to notice it because you have Friday the 13th on your mind. The other driving factor, of course, is the popularity of the Friday the 13th franchise, which ironically is another example of something that comes in sets of 12, if you include Freddy vs. Jason and the 2009 remake. And that brings us to Friday, June 13th, 1984, where it is the belief in Jason's legend that sets things off for these two camp counselors, Sandra and Jeff, because they venture away from their own camp with hopes of seeing Camp Blood, which is now a nickname used for Camp Crystal Lake. It's not clear which direction Camp Blood is from their camp. Here, they're walking with the lake on their left, but in the next shot, the lake is on their right, as if they're now traveling in the other direction. Maybe they don't know where it is, and they're just searching by trial and error, but eventually, Jason follows them and sees them hop the fence into the territory of his camp. With camp back in session, I can just imagine the postcard Jason would have sent to his mom.
Dear Mom, I'm having so much fun at camp this year. Deputy Winslow came back after hauling off those teens, so we played tag, and I tagged him with the claw of a hammer into the back of his head.
And believe me, it was a very low-speed chase. If this camper had a favorite camp activity, it was definitely hunting, as the rest of the counselors would soon find out. When some of the counselors went into town, a few stayed back with plans of hooking up, which didn't work out well for them because Jason almost seems to have a sixth sense for premarital activities. He caught one in a trap and slashed his throat with a machete. Another counselor caught a machete to the face while rolling outside to check on his girl as a thunderstorm was brewing. This also causes him to roll away from the cabin and down a long stairway. You could say that he was chair-yeeted. You have no idea how long I've waited to say that. Inside the cabin, Jason found himself a spear and a horror mask, but ended up discarding the mask. Guess it wasn't his style. Don't worry, Jason, I'm sure you'll find the perfect mask for you one day. He finds Sandra and Jeff upstairs doing the deed, stabs the spear through both of them in one go, and then hides in their bed and waits for another counselor in training to discover them, and slashes her up with a chef's knife. Maybe an homage to his mom's job when she worked at Camp Crystal Lake. After removing all the bodies, his hide and stab game continues when he camps out in a dark corner and gets the jump on Paul before turning his attention to Paul's girlfriend, Ginny. The chase takes them outside to Ginny's car, but she's able to door him and kick him in the balls to buy some escape time. While Jason is invincible, this early version of Jason wasn't as unstoppable as some of the later iterations. In my opinion, he seems to get stronger the longer he's removed from being human. But what's definitely inhuman is his apparent ability to warp around the nearby area. For example, we see him run past Ginny right here, then somehow he reappears on the trail beside her and cuts her off. I'm not suggesting that he literally has teleportation powers, by the way. I think the takeaway is just supposed to be that he has an uncanny sense of direction, and this was their way of communicating that through the medium of film. We learn something else about him when he tracks her back to one of the cabins and notices her pissing her pants in fear. Instead of just attacking her again, he tricks her into thinking he's left the room by standing on a chair and letting the door slam. Jason is not just this irreconcilable force, he also possesses some cleverness, which would come out from time to time. The chase finally ends at Jason's hut, the location of the shrine he dedicated to his mother, containing her head, her sweater, the cop, a counselor named Terry, and one older corpse, presumably belonging to Alice Rand. Jason chops down the door with a pickaxe, but instead of finding Ginny, he comes face to face with his mom, or so it seems.
Jason! It's all done, Jason. You've done your job well, and Mommy is pleased.
We see his point of view as his brain conflates the image of Ginny with that of his mother. He even starts to hear her voice in his psychosis.
Mommy has
Reward for you.
It seems that Ginny's theory that Jason was trying to resurrect his mother must have been correct, and he believes that bringing her enough victims actually did the trick. We can only speculate on what Jason actually believes, but maybe the fact that his own revival from the bottom of the lake came after Pamela killed a bunch of counselors has convinced Jason that he can do the same to bring back his mother. If this is the case, it could explain why he's become such a relentless killing machine. Perhaps his whole motivation throughout the series is to bring back his mom. This would also support my idea that Pamela was carrying Jason's soul when she killed the counselors in 1979. Belief is a powerful, powerful influence, but the illusion is broken when Ginny moves and he spots Pamela's real head, causing Jason to snap back to reality and block her machete attack, almost like a goalie might deflect a hockey puck. While Ginny's diversion was only temporary, it did buy enough time for Paul, who had regained consciousness, to find her and wrestle Jason out of the way, allowing Ginny to grab the machete and hack it several inches into Jason's left shoulder. Before leaving, they remove his burlap mask. He finds them in their cabin, and when it looks like Ginny's guard is down, he literally shatters their illusion of safety. I've noticed that there is only one thing in this world that Jason hates more than camp counselors, and that is windows. If Jason has a chance to break a window while going after his victims, he's going to do it 100% of the time. I brought the proof. Roll it. It's not just every Friday the 13th movie that contains one or more glass smashes. It's also the Friday the 13th game that came out in 2017, where the window smashing was allegedly so OP that the developers had to slow down the animation. You can also jump out windows as a counselor, where there's an achievement for jumping through 99 windows. But is there a reason that Jason hates windows as much as he does? I mean, obviously it started because it just looks cooler than the alternate scene, where he would have just jumped out from behind a dresser, but this is a character analysis video. Maybe Jason laments his childhood being cut short, and he expresses that rage through what he sees as a juvenile activity. Think about the trope of a kid in a movie getting in trouble for breaking a window with a baseball, or in some cases, a hockey puck. There are also more symbolic interpretations you could make, like the glass representing the fragility of human life. But personally, I like the juvenile disobedience thing, and Jason is gonna act like a menace until he gets his mom back. The other interesting thing about this moment is that we get a rare glimpse at Jason unmasked. Here, he looks deformed, but still very much human, basically what you would expect from a hydrocephalic child grown up. But he now has hair, mostly on the left side of his head. We'll put a pin in this for now, but I'll continue to track the changes in his facial appearance. Ginny and Paul ultimately escaped, but Jason was not caught and continued his rampage throughout that week. Note, I'm going to assume that the next few days are sequential, which seems to be the case. So Jason's next activity would take place on June 14th, 1984, where he stalks the owners of a grocery store, killing one with a cleaver and the other with her own knitting needle. Jason continued to wander the shores of Crystal Lake, which was home to many other properties, one of which was Higgins Haven, the same spot where he had nearly killed Christine Higgins 2 years before. At some point, Jason gives a detached eyeball to a wandering old man named Abel. It's not clear if this is another Jason victim or just an eye he had lying around from one of his previous victims, but he allegedly let Abel go as a warning.
He wanted me to have this. He wanted me to warn you.
The next day, June 15th, Christine would return to the house, wanting to prove to herself that she's strong enough to bury her past trauma. Let's just say she ended up burying more than that.
Relax. Enjoy the weekend. Nothing's gonna happen to you when we're all here together.
Wrong! When Christine and her friends arrived at the Haven, Jason would have 7 new targets on his radar. But perhaps for the first time, he found one he could identify with.
Dear Mom, I'm making a lot of friends. I was shy at first, but Fox really liked my pitchfork, and so did her friend Loka. Their other friend Ali wanted to play too, but he had to take a nap. That's okay though, there are more friends to meet at the main house. There's one boy over there who's just like me. His name is Shelly. I'm gonna go try to make friends with him. Love, Jason.
It is true that Shelly and Jason have a lot in common. For one, they tend to scare people.
Just forget about me. Oh, I'm supposed to forget that we've been friends for...
Ah! God damn it, Shelly.
And like Jason, Shelly is also insecure about his appearance, which is why he keeps a variety of scary masks with him at all times.
Just relax. Be yourself.
Would you be yourself if you look like this?
Jason previously wore a bag over his head, but hasn't found a replacement since it was removed 2 days earlier. But when Jason sees Shelly pull a prank on one of the girls where he rises out of the lake with a hockey mask and spear gun, he becomes very interested in this mask. Maybe it's because seeing Shelly emerge from the lake to scare someone reminds him of himself.
That'll teach you a valuable lesson. A beautiful girl like you should never go out in the dark alone.
What? What kind of lesson is that? Anyways, Jason also sort of teaches lessons with his kills because he especially likes to target teens and young adults who are distracted by their vices, such as premarital relations and drugs. This is why the counselors were distracted and could not save him when he fell in the lake as a kid. But by getting revenge on anyone who does that kind of stuff, he's inadvertently discouraging that kind of behavior. All of this is to say that he has even more in common with Shelly, so he decides that he's going to become him. He slits the fat boy's throat and steals his gear, and with that, his iconic costume is finally complete. His first use of the hockey mask is to trick the girl, Vera. By the time she realizes it's not Shelly rising out of the water again, it's too late, and she gets shot through her eye with a spear. The rest of the friend group would follow soon after. His sixth sense for illicit material leads him to Andy, who is headed downstairs to grab a beer after hooking up with his girlfriend, Debbie. Double mistake. Andy gets hacked in half while doing a handstand, and Debbie, after noticing her boyfriend's blood dripping from the ceiling above her, is stabbed through the hammock she's relaxing on. Chuck and Chili are the stoner couple, so Jason throws him into an electrical box and pokes her with a red-hot fire poker. Christine's boyfriend, Rick, goes outside to look around, and Jason captures him, covering his mouth as Chris calls out for him, not bashing his head in until after she goes back inside. It's not entirely clear why he does this, but I have to assume that because Christine got away from him before, he wants to scare her as much as possible. Like a good horror director, he wants to build up the tension as much as possible before she discovers him, which he does by staging the bodies for her to find them. Then, when she's at her most vulnerable, he releases all of the tension by defenestrating her boyfriend. What is defenestration, you ask? It's the act of throwing someone out a window. This will be on the vocab quiz, and if it was ever going to come up, it was bound to be in a video about Jason. And by the way, the built-up tension to this point was worth it, because her scream is pretty great when Jason's intimidating stature appears in the window frame. That's gotta be one of the best ones I've ever heard. The chase takes her through the house, out the window, and into the van where she tries to escape, but it gets stuck on the bridge, allowing Jason to strangle her in the open driver's side window. Christine uses this to her advantage by rolling up the window and trapping him there, until he gets the bright idea to just face bash through it, like Nathan Explosion trying to get a sausage at the deli counter. Christine attempts to barricade herself in the barn, which might be a good plan if you had a cell phone and you were trying to stall while waiting for help to arrive, but that's not the case here in 1984. But after he inevitably gets in and ransacks the barn, he still doesn't find her until he's attacked from above, which doesn't do a whole lot, but it affords her enough time to hide up in the loft and get the sneak strike on him with a shovel when he comes looking. This incapacitates him. Remember, this was the same iteration of Jason that got knocked down by the car door. He's still relatively human in terms of how much abuse he can handle. While he's out, Chris ties a rope around his neck and shoves him out the window, presumably executing him. But when she heads downstairs to let herself out, he comes to life and pulls himself up out of the gallows, removing his mask as he does so. Chris sees the face she couldn't make herself forget, the one that attacked her 2 summers prior. This brings up what many see as a pretty bad continuity error. When we saw Jason's face at the end of part 2, just a couple of days before, he had long hair and a beard. Now, in part 3, he's bald and clean shaven. Some will point to this as evidence of the multiple Jasons theory. However, the facial construction and messed up teeth are the same. I don't think it's crazy to assume that Jason would try shaving to change his appearance after Ginny gave his description to the police in order to try to lay low. That seems a lot more likely than Pamela finding 2 people with the exact same facial deformity. It's like he remembers her and wants her to suffer the most because she escaped last time. Jason would have a history of continuing to go after his targets until he can catch them. But he also has a history of being easily distracted, which is what happens when Ali, the motorcyclist from earlier, comes back for round 2. This time, Ali is a bit short-handed. Literally, Jason slices the guy's hand off. It oftentimes feels like the general consensus is that Jason is stupid, but as I pointed out earlier, that's not the case. He's actually kind of clever, manipulating what his victims see to trick them, luring people to certain locations, and disguising himself to blend in and get people to drop their guard. So why is it so common to see him get so close to killing one victim, only to get distracted and turn his attention away completely? I mean, the filmmaking reason is to extend the suspense, but as I mentioned earlier, I think that can also extend to Jason's motivation. He wants Christine to be afraid for as long as possible, because when he was an 11-year-old boy drowning in that lake, it was probably a slow and terrifying death. This time, however, the distraction created by Ali works against him, because Christine finds an axe and strikes him in the head. For the second time, Jason Voorhees is killed, but that would not be the end of the story. Jason Voorhees is a fictional supernatural slasher known for killing a lot of victims in each movie he appeared in. But is that the only thing he kills? Now that he's gained his emblematic hockey mask, I wanted to explore the idea that Jason also killed the retro goalie mask in our world. I found an article about the evolution of goalie masks in hockey, which was a great resource, taking the reader through the history of protective face wear. Starting from the first goalie to wear a mask in organized hockey, Elizabeth Graham, who tended the net for Queen's University in 1927. I couldn't find a picture of her wearing the mask, but it was said to be a fencing mask, so it might have looked something like this. The mask took a number of forms over the years from 1927 to 1959, when Montreal Canadiens goaltender Jacques Plante regularly wore what is sometimes described as the face-hugging mask, which may sound like something from the Alien franchise, but the biggest pop culture moment for it was indeed in the Friday the 13th series with Jason. The face-hugging mask proved to be a canvas for some creative designs, but the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Evolution of Hockey Masks article both cite the switch to the birdcage masks happening in the early 1980s. Jason got his mask in Friday the 13th Part 3, which came out in 1982. So I wanted to find out when the switch actually started to happen and if Jason was a reason for the change in styles. So I pulled up some footage and looked at every team starting goalie in the 1982 season and found that of the 21 teams, 14 starting goalies used the birdcage style mask and only 7 still had face huggers. So no, Jason did not kill that style of mask. It was already on the way out. If anything, he might have revived its popularity with kids and prolonged it. And speaking of revival, on June 16, 1984, Jason was lying in a morgue in the Wessex County Medical Center, where the coroner, Axel, is flirting with one of the nurses, and immediately after doing this, Jason begins to stir. It's almost as if even the suggestion of premarital activities is enough to bring Jason back to put a stop to it. Axel moves the body to cold storage, but Jason gets out and serrates the medical examiner's neck with a bone cutter. Soon after, he catches up with the nurse and runs a scalpel through her torso. After escaping, Jason ends up heading back towards Crystal Lake, arriving in the area during the day on June 18th. I'm assuming that it was the 18th because Jason's body went missing from the morgue on the 16th, and it looks to be late at night, seeing as how Axel and Nurse Morgan appear to be the last ones there. So they would be discovered by the morning shift on the 17th and included in the next day's newspaper on the 18th. He takes out at least one person on the way, a hippie hitchhiker with a Canada in love sign who he stabs in the neck. She represents the hippie movement of the 60s and 70s, which stood for peace and wanderlust. She's the cultural opposite of Jason Voorhees, who stands for violence and staying in one place. He ends up at a small rural neighborhood that's within walking distance from the lake. It consists of 2 houses, one belonging to Mrs. Jarvis, who lives there with her 2 kids and dog, and the other is a rental property which is rented by 6 kids to party in that summer. When they arrive, they immediately begin drinking and hooking up, which may explain why Jason was drawn to the area. The following night, June 19th, he encounters one of them by the lake. If Jason were to list his accomplishments in a postcard to his mom, it would look something like this.
I got the girl in the dinghy with my knife. The boy who came looking for her with Shelly's spear gun. I just missed the one camping in the woods, but I wrecked all his stuff. One twin sister got caught with me in the rain. One boy needed help finding the corkscrew.
Hey, Ted, where the hell's the corkscrew?
The other twin sister got too close to a window. And you know how I hate windows. And a boy named Teddy spent a little too much time watching something he shouldn't have in front of the TV.
No, seriously, Teddy finds this old stag film reel and he finds it absolutely hilarious. One of the prime examples of fictional characters being entertained by something that isn't remotely entertaining. Because 10 minutes later, he's still laughing at it just as hard, and a full 5 minutes after that, he seems even more enamored with it.
Some folks have a strange idea entertaining.
It's too bad he died. He'd be the ideal subscriber. I could just put out anything I'd want and he'd love it. Anyway, Jason blindsides a boy named Doug in the shower and crushes his face against the wall. And when his girlfriend, Sarah, finds him, she raises a panic, but Jason silences that alarm by throwing an axe through her chest. And with that, the household of scandalous teens is dead, leaving just the Jarvis family and Robert, who's the brother of Sandra, who Jason speared 6 days before, so now he's out for revenge. There's an interesting detail as Jason is destroying the Jarvis' telephone line. His hands are pale and rotting, and his fingernails are black and overgrown. This is not the result of Jason joining some kind of industrial metal band. It seems now that he's been killed for a second time, his body is experiencing a zombification, and he's beginning his transformation into a deadite. And just like the most iconic deadites, his next move would be to wait down in the basement, where he would eventually kill Robert with what appears to be a gardening claw, thereby ending Robert's bid to avenge his sister. He breaks through the underside of the stairs to try to get a hold of his next victim, Mrs. Jarvis's teenage daughter, Trish, who finds Jason has decorated the rental house with all of that evening's victims. After escaping back to her own house, she does everything she can to protect her little brother, Tommy Jarvis, who is nearly abducted by the hockey mask Hellbringer. At which point Jason shows them he means business by busting through the Jarvis' front door. See, if there's anything Jason hates most, other than camp counselors and windows, it's doors. And since he came back from the dead 3 days ago, he seems to have more strength than ever before, which he takes full advantage of from here on out. Roll it. He would use his new ability to corner Trish and Tommy in an upstairs bedroom. But could he actually get the job done this time and take out his final targets? With Trish and Tommy Jarvis pushed to the back corner of Tommy's room, Jason seems to have the two dead to rights. But the RCA Corporation has other ideas, because Trish smashes a big old 80s TV over his head, putting him out cold on the floor. Though, we would find out if he survived a lot faster than Stu Macher, the Scream character who we still don't know the status of after 28 years. More chasing ensues, and there's a pretty cool shot of him in the doorway right here, but it ends back at the Jarvis house, where Trish gets a hold of the machete and uses it to cut Jason's hand in half. But this hardly seems to slow him down at all. In my professional opinion, that is, as a YouTuber, not a doctor, the further he gets in his transformation to deadite, the less human pain he's able to feel. We see a machete chop to the chest does nothing. The only thing that can stop him is the same vulnerability that Ginny exploited the week prior. Tommy, an expert special effects enthusiast, comes downstairs, having shaved his head to resemble the police sketch of Jason from when he emerged from the lake in 1979. Jason seems to have a weak spot for figures resembling his mother or resembling himself. Again, Jason is not that stupid. I think the only reason this works on him is because he knows that the magic of the Necronomicon is at play, so being approached by a younger version of himself doesn't seem that out of the question. Jason would be confronted with himself one more time later down the timeline, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The distraction allows Trish to knock his mask off with a machete blow to the head, giving us an updated look at his face. He's now developed wrinkles and scarring. Remember, all 3 of these face picks happen over the course of a week, which I think supports the idea that he's undergoing a supernatural transformation. The removal of the mask allows Tommy Jarvis to pick up the dropped blade and make a much deeper gash into the Silent Stalker's face. This still doesn't get the job done though. Jason's fingers can be seen moving, so Tommy goes, well, I think we can just call it full Tommy Jarvis mode, slashing the seemingly eternal villain over and over. Jason appears to die for real this time, with headlines like Jason Voorhees slain and killing spree ends in Crystal Lake. Ironically, he was buried in a place called Eternal Peace Cemetery, but his rest would be anything but eternal. In 1988 or 1989, a local man stole Jason's persona to commit a series of murders, but was killed shortly thereafter, giving the community confidence that the fear of a Crystal Lake killer was something that they could leave behind in the 1980s. Because of this, they renamed the whole area to Forest Green, from Forest Green County to Lake Forest Green, all the way down to Camp Forest Green, which was also relocated to a smaller part of the lake.
No one in Forest Green wants to be reminded of what that maniac did here. That's why we changed the name.
But the people of Forest Green would soon learn that no matter what you do in the present, you can't stop the effects of the past from resurfacing. The first one to learn this lesson was a young Rennie Wickham, who was boating on the lake with her uncle when he pushed her in, and the spirit of young Jason Voorhees pulled her further under the water. Rennie would escape, but continue to be haunted by the memory. While this loose spirit seemed to be confined to the lake bed, Tommy Jarvis was plagued by Jason in a different way: psychological hallucinations. On Thursday, June 12, 1990, now all grown up, he set out to destroy Jason's corpse, thinking it would put an end to his psychological trauma. But upon seeing the man who nearly killed his whole family, he goes full Tommy Jarvis mode again, repeatedly impaling the remains of the legendary killer with a fence post. But then, the plan backfires as a bolt of lightning strikes the post twice, sending an electric current through Jason's body, which somehow revives him for a 3rd time. Obviously, this is a reference to Frankenstein, where a scientist harnesses the power of lightning as the electrical energy needed to create life in a figure of stitched together body parts. Don't try that at home. How this applies to Jason is not really clear. If the first and second revival were a result of the Necronomicon and the need to punish high libido, is the lightning strike just dumb chance? I think not, because of the specific choice to have lightning strike the same spot twice, something that is said to be impossible. Maybe Pamela Voorhees was pulling the strings from the afterlife, or maybe the Necronomicon's curse dictates that anytime there's a chance to bring Jason back, it will happen. Only one thing is sure: Jason lives. As you might assume, this Jason no longer looks human at all, taking on the appearance of a stereotypical zombie. His face is literally crawling with maggots, leading to his eventual nickname, Maggot Head.
Come on, Maggot Head!
And just like the last 2 times he was revived, he's gained even more power, which he shows by punching a hole straight through the chest of Tommy's friend, knocking him back into the open grave. This is not just a personal theory anymore, because Tommy seems to notice it too.
We've got to do something. He's even more powerful now.
Aren't you the kid whose mother and friends were killed by that maniac?
As always, Jason heads back to where he feels most at home, the lakeside campground. And on the way, he encounters 2 of his least favorite things: camp counselors. With the fence post still in hand, Jason punctures their tire, punctures the male counselor, and finally stands over the female counselor and jams his rod down her throat. And yes, I'm aware that she's carrying around an expired debit card. I can tell it's expired because the next day is stated to be Friday the 13th.
Happy Friday the 13th.
As we know, Friday the 13th in a movie is the equivalent of Friday the 15th in real life. Here are the Friday the 15ths in the late 80s, and here are the Friday the 15ths in the 1990s. The calendar in the sheriff's office shows that it's June, meaning that Jason's next rampage must have taken place on Friday, June 13th, 1990. Which includes 5 company officials who are on a paintball retreat, the drunkard digger of graves who gets destroyed with his own bottle, the pair of promiscuous picnickers who gets pierced with Jason's machete, and the couple of carnal camp counselors who gets killed in their caravan after copious amounts of coitus. I don't know if poetry was an activity at Camp Forest Green, but I feel like that at least belongs on a postcard. Because apparently the campers don't actually send their parents postcards, they use pad and paper. Jason, by the way, pops right back up after the RV crash with no apparent injuries. Finally, Jason arrives at Camp Forest Green, but for the first time since he was a camper there, camp activities would be in session. There's a moment that caught my eye right before Jason's arrival at the camp. One of the kids is reading John Paul Sartre's No Exit, a play in which the characters are trapped together in a room that represents hell. It seems fitting, seeing as how they're all about to find themselves in an inescapable hell with Jason. More than anything, this story, Jason Lives, is about the idea that history cannot be altered or forgotten. You have to accept that tragedy happens, but make the most of your situation regardless. This is illustrated in the constant contrast between the erasure of the past and the legacy of Jason Voorhees. The name of the county, city, and campground have all been changed, and anyone who brings up Jason is run out of town. But his imprint on the community is inescapable. There's a card game about him called Camp Blood, where Jason is a jack and other face cards represent counselors. And even the little kids have nightmares, reflecting the passing of the legend about their most infamous resident. But to their horror, Jason is a bigger threat now than he ever was in the past, as the counselors would soon find out. One counselor, Elizabeth Baker, thinks she hears a friend playing a prank on her and tries to get him back by drenching him with her drink. But Jason is not someone who messes around when it comes to water, and twists Ms. Baker's head off of her neck. Another Forest Green staff member, Paula, is killed inside of her cabin, then promptly defenestrated, because that's kinda Jason's thing. Jason enters the girl's cabin, leans over the bed of one girl who's awake, but ultimately hears a car door slam outside and doesn't attack any of the kids. So what's the deal here? When I covered Michael Myers on Horror History, I talked about how he doesn't like harming kids, likely due to Arrested Development. Because he was traumatized as a kid, he sees himself as a kid. You could make the same argument for Jason. He was drowned when he was 11, so he'll always be sympathetic towards kids. At least that's how Tom McLaughlin, the director of Jason Lives, sees it.
Here again is the whole thing of having children there, and we've seen how violent Jason can be, and I'm sure most people think, you're not going to kill a kid, are you? Well, of course we don't, but it does add attention.
However, there have been 11 different directors in this franchise, each with their own vision for the character. I'm not going to take a remark in a DVD commentary as gospel. Jason had no problem going after Tommy Jarvis when he was a kid, after all, and honestly, it doesn't make much sense. The kids were the ones who bullied him and pushed him off of the dock, and he's never taken pity on characters that he relates to begin with, otherwise he wouldn't have killed Shelly. So I think this is just another instance of Jason allowing himself to get distracted in order to confuse and terrorize his victims. As the police pull up, he hides out in the trees and manages to take out one officer with a throwing knife, but another manages to get the draw on him and fires 5 shots into his chest. But the bullets go right through this new and improved maggot head Jason, allowing him to walk right up and crush his head. A heavier shotgun blast from Sheriff Garris is enough to knock Jason off of his feet, but he gets up and just continues his pursuit each time, in the end breaking the head honcho's spine in hand-to-hand combat.
What do you think? I think we're dead meat.
Hey, wrong channel, kid. Now, you may be wondering, with Maggot Head Jason being effectively invincible, is there any way to stop him? Would you even want to stop him if it just means him coming back even more powerful? Tommy Jarvis did his homework on the occult, and he has the answer. According to his research in these books, including 30 Years Among the Dead, Dead Are Alive, and A Manual of Occultism, the only way to stop Jason is to trap him in his original resting place, at the bottom of Crystal Lake. This plotline actually works nicely with theory number 4. It makes sense that to stop a spell enacted from the Necronomicon, you'd have to consult some magic literature of your own. Meanwhile, Jason's next target is the sheriff's daughter, Megan. But when he hears the voice of Tommy Jarvis call out, Jason turns his attention to him, the one who killed him years earlier, and the one who interrupted his slumber in the cemetery. It's likely that Tommy is the one that Jason is looking for all this time. Jason marches towards Tommy's boat in the lake. He walks straight down under the surface, apparently unable to float. But after launching himself out of the water, the two struggle, and Tommy is able to lock a chain around Jason's neck. When Crystal Lake's eternal resident tries to fight back, he body slams the boat in half, causing the boulder on the opposite end of the chain to sink to the bottom of the lake. It lands next to the old sign for Camp Crystal Lake, signifying how you can try to bury the past, but you can't do away with it forever. Even with Jason tethered below the surface, he's still able to reach for Tommy and later Megan when she tries to save him. His relentless attack doesn't end until she manages to reach for the boat and steer the propeller into Jason's face and neck, which cuts through his mask and finally appears to return him to his watery grave. The greatest chapter in Jason's history is over.
It's over. It's finally over. Jason's home.
But as the title suggests, Jason lives. He would remain there, stuck in place for nearly 2 years. This would go on to be the most iconic part of Jason's story in our worlds too. So much so that it inspired one of the coolest pieces of fan art that I've ever seen. In 2013, a Minnesota-based diver and horror fan named Doug Klein created a life-size Jason Voorhees doll and anchored it 120 feet at the bottom of a flooded mine pit. The area is used as a scuba diving school, and it's far down enough that you'll need a light to see it even during the day. Imagine going down in a practice dive and coming mask to mask with the Crystal Lake Killer himself. It sounds like a cool setup for a Friday the 13th movie, but the actual story of Jason's return is much more bizarre than that. date. In this one, there's a calendar opened up to the month of May, and there's only one May in the 1990s containing a Friday the 13th in their universe or a Friday the 15th in our universe, and that is May of 1992. Specifically, May 12th is where things pick back up, and it involves a psychokinetic teenager named Tina Shepard and her psychiatrist, Dr. Cruz.
Your psychokinetic ability is a projection of the suppressed guilt feelings that you have.
Would you speak English?
What part of that was not English? I mean, even if you didn't know what psychokinetic meant, you could easily figure it out based on the context of the conversation. And it's not like Carrie hasn't come out yet at that point. Anyway, Tina is ridden with guilt over an incident from her childhood where she lost control of her powers, accidentally resulting in the death of her father. As she stands at the edge of the lake, she senses Jason's presence down there, but in her emotional state, she confuses it for her father and telekinetically frees him from his confining chains. Jason, now withered to the bone in some places, rises from the dark waters and disappears into the woods. Visually, this is one of the coolest iterations of Jason. After 2 years of erosion at the bottom of the lake, his mask is cracked away and his jaw is rotted to expose the menacing set of teeth on the left side of his face. It wouldn't take long for Jason to come across a broken down car with 2 potential victims to get himself back in the homicidal groove. This entry, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, takes place at these 2 houses along the lake in just about the same spot that the cabins were in Part 6, Jason Lives. Normally when I'm making these videos, I would come up with some kind of excuse to explain away the continuity errors, like I did earlier when I said Jason shaved between Part 2 and Part 3 to avoid police detection. For this, there's no excuse. In 1990, there's a campground here and no 2-story houses in sight, and in 1992, there's just a neighborhood and no campground in sight. I would say that the camp was demolished after Jason Lives and the houses were built in the meantime, but there's also a flashback to the mid-80s where we can see the same houses. I would say that there are multiple docks on Crystal Lake, kind of like how Camp Blood and Camp Packanack were 2 separate locations. But no, this is the same dock that Jason is anchored under. At this point, I would try to say that maybe there are multiple timelines and Jason Lives takes place in a different reality than New Blood. But no, we see a flashback in New Blood with footage from Jason Lives, making it very clear that this is a direct sequel. It's just a really egregious continuity error that we'll have to try to ignore. Also, it's been renamed back to Crystal Lake now. Anyway, New Blood is centered around a birthday party happening at one of the houses.
A surprise party!
The party is for this guy, Michael, but his car breaks down on the way and they have the misfortune of coming across Jason. His girlfriend gets the old knife pinning her to a tree routine, and Michael gets a very special birthday surprise, the old throwing knife routine. I guess that's what he gets for trying to celebrate his own birthday on Jason's favorite pseudo-holiday. He also comes across another couple camping in the woods. When the boyfriend steps away to retrieve some wood, Jason punches right through him and steals his machete. I'm not sure why he needs a machete when he can punch through human flesh, but he certainly likes the way that he looks with one. He takes it back to their campsite where Judy says this.
Okay, you big hunk of a man, come and get me.
Which is not the wisest choice of words considering what Jason is known for. However, he only uses the machete to open the tent. Judy's actual method of death is a little maneuver I like to call the sleeping bag slam, which would become a favorite of mine. The next day is the big one, Friday the 13th. Does anyone else find it interesting that Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky day and Jason always seems to return on that day, mostly just by luck? It's not like he's waiting around all year and decides to strike on Friday the 13th. Most of the time he's dead or in captivity and someone just so happens to revive him right before Friday the 13th. Anyway, Jason's postcard to his mom this time would have included 2 college students who go skinny dipping. One is axed, the other drowned. One insecure girl who he follows into a shed. She believes she's outsmarted him by burrowing under a wall, but he knows exactly where she is and impales her with a giant hook. Awesome. Another couple shagging in a van, resulting in a skull crushed and an eye gouged out with a party horn. Yet another couple who work up an appetite with their late night activities.
The Neanderthal man, hunter-gatherer, seeks nourishment.
Not sure why you said it like that, but okay. Instead of getting a midnight snack, David gets a midnight kitchen knife through the rib, and he's later decapitated. His girl later finds his head, and you know exactly where she's going before it even happens. And this guy, Eddie, our aspiring science fiction writer, also gets a classic death, decapitation by machete. The birthday party backdrop for all of these kills could be interpreted as a symbol for the themes that are present in this story. Jason's rival this time is the telekinetic girl, Tina. Both are going through their own personal rebirth of sorts. Jason is metaphorically reborn, from under the surface of Crystal Lake to massacre a new generation of teens, and Tina is being reborn in the sense that she has to learn to harness her previously repressed special powers. It's a battle of which one will find his or her footing first. But lost in the commotion of the lakeside slaughterfest are Tina's mom, Mrs. Shepard, and her doctor, Dr. Cruz. and Jason is drawn to the sound of their argument. He approaches them holding a bush axe, which I didn't even know what that was until I looked it up. It just looks like a weapon to me, but apparently it's the greatest tool ever.
These awesome things, bush axes. Some people call them brush hooks, some people call them big blades on a stick. Stick around, or don't. Go get some water, go get some sweet tea. Listen to that wind. It's fall here in Georgia. Anyway, bush axe to the face.
What a guy. Dude just loves bush axes. Anyway, Mrs. Shepherd makes like a bush and gets axed. After disposing of her, Jason comes back with a motorized branch saw. Call him Landscaping Jason, I guess. Dr. Cruz just kind of stops running at some point, and Jason comes in from the opposite side somehow and kills him, which is weirdly another example of Jason seemingly being able to warp from spot to spot. Another thing I find interesting about Landscaping Jason is that he moves all of his victims to one spot in the woods. It makes me wonder if he's attempting to build another shrine, like he's still stuck on the idea that he can bring back his mother if he performs this ritual. We never get to find out if those were his intentions though, because eventually he crosses paths with Tina, who uses her telekinesis to wrap Jason up in tree roots, pin him down in a puddle, and break off an overhead power cable to electrocute him, which is suspiciously similar to something that Carrie White does in Stephen King's novel Carrie. But this doesn't keep him down very long. Tina tries to fight him off by repeatedly air-yeeting heavy objects in his direction, and eventually she just collapses the roof on him.
I killed him. Jason's dead.
He wasn't dead, as proven when he axed this girl in the face and chased the last two remaining survivors, Tina and her love interest Nick. And this is where we learn that if there's one thing Jason hates more than camp counselors, windows, and doors, it's definitely walls and sometimes the floor. As he attempts to crush Nick, Tina tries to save her new boyfriend by squeezing Jason's mask so tight that white pus oozes out of his skull and the mask breaks off entirely. Oh man, Shelly's gonna be pissed. There's an interesting pattern here though. Jason may be invincible in the sense that you can't kill shot him, but it's clear that he's continuing to degrade as time goes on. The battle between Tina and Jason is an epic one, but it ends with Tina dropping him through a hole into the basement, Jason pulling her down with him, and her driving him back with a jar of nails, a can of gasoline, and finally lighting him up with the flames from the furnace. Not only is this another page taken from the book of Carrie White, but there's a fun trivia item for you. Jason was the original slasher to get basement burninated 30 years before Michael Myers. So that's it. Jason's body was completely annihilated by the blast, and he couldn't possibly come back. Oh no, he's already back. Their battle actually ends on the docks, where Tina uses her abilities to latch onto her father, who had died at this very spot 10 years ago, and he wraps yet another chain around Jason's neck and drags him back into the lake's dark waters, trapping them both below the surface once again. The dad doesn't look decayed at all, which is weird and makes me wonder if Crystal Lake itself is actually part of the formula for granting eternal life. Like, is Jason's invincibility tied to the fact that he drowned in this lake specifically? I'm gonna try not to think too hard about it, because like I said, New Blood is not exactly a shining example of good continuity. The more important takeaway is that the mask is destroyed and Jason is returned to his underwater prison, but it's only a matter of time until the suffocated summer camper would surface yet again. Jason's next rampage wouldn't happen for another 6 years during a high school graduation celebration.
This request has gone all the way out to Crystal Lake in the senior class at Lakeview High.
That's us.
All right. They'll be graduating on the 13th of this month.
In the US, graduation ceremonies typically take place in June. So in the real world, that's a Friday, June 15th we're looking for. However, the only such date during the 90s is in 1990, before the events of New Blood. We know this is after New Blood because we see Jason crushed under the dock just like after his battle with Tina. So maybe Lakeview High graduated in May instead of June. In fact, when I was in high school, our graduation was in May because the seniors got to get out earlier than the rest of the school. If it's in May, then there are two possible dates, May 1992 and May 1998. 92 would be during New Blood. So because of this line from one of the Lakeview High teachers,
Jason Voorhees has been dead for years.
It must be May of 1998. Don't be fooled into listening to this character, Jim Miller, who tells of Jason's drowning about 30 years ago. He must be misinformed. 30 years after the drowning would be 1987, and we're way past that at this point. Note how the visuals when he tells this story show Jason drowning at night, and he says that's when the murder started to happen, which is incorrect. So Jim Miller is just an unreliable storyteller. He also claims that these are just stories, which is categorically untrue, something he'd know if he paid any attention to the news. He would find out the truth the hard way when his boat's anchor cuts into a power cable under the lake, which somehow results in Jason getting pumped with electricity again, which as we know is an effective way to revive him. And, as luck would have it, Jim happened to have a replica Jason mask that he used to scare his girlfriend, Susie Donaldson. This also kind of shows that Jason's notoriety has grown in-universe, to the point that costume products are being made in his image. I suppose this could just be another hockey mask, but seeing as how this is nearly a decade after the last use of the old mask style in the NHL in 1990 by journeyman Sam St. Laurent, it seems more likely that Jason merch has made its way into costume shops. As is often the case, Jim and Susie made the mistake of rocking the boat, so Jason arms himself with a harpoon gun for a pair of nautical kills. At this point, Jason takes control of their boat, and surprisingly, he voluntarily leaves Crystal Lake for the first time, driving the vessel out to the ocean. There's no indication as to why he decides to do this, but I can speculate. Jim and Susie were supposed to be part of a cruise to New York City to celebrate their graduation starting on Friday the 13th. Jason probably wanted to do something special for Friday the 13th since it had been many years since his last Rampage, and figured what better place to find teens to kill than a graduation cruise. So that takes us directly to Friday, May 13th, 1998, when Jason swims from the drifter to the motor vessel Lazarus, Panama, and climbs up on a rope dangling from the side. The name of the ship, the Lazarus, is a reference to Lazarus of Bethany, a figure in Christianity whose life is restored by Jesus 4 days after his death, perhaps an intentional nod to Jason's ability to return from death each time he meets his demise. As usual, he's spotted by a harbinger.
This voyage is doomed.
And one by one, he takes down each of the students traveling on board, starting with a new spin on an old classic. Where the old landscape in Jason would have used a bush axe, the new seafaring Jason uses a different kind of axe.
Is this axe awesome or what?
This chick ends up getting cut down by her own axe in the power room under the hull. The spree continues, with one student who gets a hot sauna rock smashed through his torso, causing his insides to catch fire, one egotistical bully girl who he slices up with a broken mirror shard, which may or may not be some kind of message about inner beauty, and he harpoons the ship's second in command, Jim Carlson, which is like the third Jim that he's killed. What does he have against people named Jim? Does he just hate anyone else who has a J name? When the captain comes back to find his cohort massacred, Jason appears behind him and slits his throat with, I'm not exactly sure what this is, but I believe it may be a marine machete, a common tool on ships designed for cutting ropes and other materials, a nautical twist on one of Jason's favorite weapons. Throughout all of this, graduating senior Rennie Wickham and her dog Toby see terrifying visions of the child form of Jason. It's likely that she was targeted with these visions or spirits because she and Jason both share the experience of nearly drowning in Crystal Lake at the age of 11. Rennie ended up developing a fear of water because of this incident.
I swear.
That was not an accident. Jason had a fear of water as a kid due to his inability to swim, but now that he's immortal, his fear of drowning is no longer relevant. However, I will come back to this concept later. Jason goes through his usual routine. Normally, he cuts electricity and telephone lines, but since they're on a boat, he sabotages the vessel's communication equipment. At some point, he hears an emergency PA announcement, asking those on board to meet at the bridge, but he catches one straggler, a girl named Eva, and she tries to hide from him on the party deck. She seemingly gets disoriented by all the lights and music or something. It's honestly a very strange scene that goes on way too long. But long story short, she panics at the disco and he decides, let's kill tonight. And he does, he strangles her. I guess it's a sin and a tragedy. He also chucks a film student into an electrical box and sounds the fire alarm, which I guess is the right thing to do considering the kid's body is on fire. The fire melts a hole in the ship, causing it to start taking on water. But Jason wastes no time taking whatever victims he can. Like the kid who is thrown from a ladder and skewered on the boat's antenna, the deckhand who gets a fire axe in the back, or the other kids who he leaves for dead to drown in the disco. In a haunting display, Jason simply watches as he leaves the last 5 remaining humans and one dog to huddle into the lifeboat and paddle away into the storm. We don't see Jason again until he emerges from the water at the harbor in New York City. I can only assume that after the Lazarus sunk, he simply walked along the ocean floor, looking up at the lifeboat and following them until they reached shore. Since he's already drowned 3 times before, his lungs are filled with water and he's dense enough to stay down. And since he can't be killed, he doesn't need oxygen. Jason comes face to face with a billboard for the Eastern Hockey League, where he sees a mask nearly identical to his. After seeing it, he reverses his course. I have to wonder if he was remembering back to when Tommy Jarvis used his own image to trick him and decided to just steer clear this time. After he wanders the docks, he finds Rennie, who's in the midst of being assaulted by 2 gangsters. Jason makes like Max Mayfield from Stranger Things and finds a random needle to stab the guy with, which goes clean through him, and it might just be the most accidentally heroic thing that Jason has ever done. This is a part of why I think it's BS when people say, Jason doesn't kill kids, or Jason only wanted revenge for his death, or Jason is just the embodiment of evil. The moment shows that Jason doesn't discriminate. He wants to kill everyone, good or bad. It doesn't matter to him. After the other criminal gets his face bashed into a steaming pipe, Jason doesn't hesitate to turn his attention to Rennie. Jason Takes Manhattan is all about kids who have expectations set by parents and guardians that they're trying to break out of. Rennie wants to overcome her fears instead of living in the shadow of fear under her uncle. Sean wants to carve his own path instead of becoming a sea captain like his father. The Statue of Liberty in New York represents a new destiny for many immigrants, and Sean gifts Rennie a Lady Liberty necklace, representing a new start for them without being controlled by past authority figures. The overall theme of this entry can also kind of be applied to Jason. He too is finally changing his destiny. His whole existence up to this point has been about staying back at Crystal Lake and avenging his mother, listening to her every command if he has to. But now, he's leaving Crystal Lake for the first time and doing his own thing in New York, ending the lives of whoever he wants, whenever he wants along the way. Maybe he'll just send a postcard. But this time, he's got his sights set on the survivors. He allowed the school's star boxer to throw 57 punches at him uncontested, but demonstrated his superiority by knocking his opponent's head off with one huge haymaker. However, that's nothing compared to the squad car that Rennie rams him with. But even that only keeps Jason down for a few seconds. And Rennie's uncle, Mr. McCullough, pays the price with the honorary defenestration of the summer. Jason then dunks him in a barrel of sewage to drown the guy. A fitting end to the guy who once nearly drowned his niece, to be honest. Rennie, understandably, starts to lose it.
I was at school and they told me, Rennie, your parents died in a car accident. It just seems like everybody I care about, I lose.
It's not gonna happen this time.
What? What are you talking about? She just lost her uncle, her teacher, the only trusted adult in her life, and basically all of her classmates. Dude, no, not the time for that. As you may recall, Jason looks to kind of have a sixth sense for romantic activities, and this seems to activate it. The chase after his final two targets commences, taking them into the subway where Jason is electrocuted on the tracks, through Times Square where Jason scares off a group of punks with his face.
Yo man, it's cool, man, it's cool.
Through a diner and into the sewers where he jumps a sanitation worker and bashes his head in with his own tool. Though she may not have any superpowers or occult knowledge like her two predecessors, Rennie still manages to surprise him with a bucket of toxic chemicals, which are just lying around. This seems to hurt him more than almost anything we've seen before, causing him to remove his mask and scream in pain. The unmasked Jason looks different from his previous zombie iteration. He now seems to have lost all of his teeth and devolved into more of a slime monster than a zombie, perhaps as a result of the toxic waste melting away his rotting skin. His left eye seems to have basically turned to mush, and he's left stumbling around, barely holding his balance. If there's any conclusion I can take away from the evolution of these rare appearances of his unmasked face, it's that even though Jason can't experience true death, the damage issued by his opponents over the last 2 decades are slowly breaking him down. Still, he manages to reach his targets at the 144th Street access ladder. Only problem is, he's too late. The 12 a.m. flood of toxic waste rapidly floods the sewer system. I don't know why the NYC sewers are filled with toxic waste, but we just saw the effect that a little bit of this material had on him. The prospect of getting washed away with this stuff triggers flashbacks to the waves washed over him as a child in Crystal Lake, costing him his life for the first time. After this, Rennie sees the vision of Jason's drowned body as a child one last time, as the threat is finally swept away long enough for her, Sean, and the dog Toby to safely get out of New York. At some point, Jason must have walked back to New Jersey and continued his tradition of killings back at Crystal Lake. Or at least I assume the killing continued, because why else would there have been an FBI response to Jason Voorhees? He got a new mask, which now barely fits over his face and almost seems to be melding into it. I can't give you an exact date for the FBI attack on Jason. It could have been any time between 2001 and 2005. I can't use my old trick of finding which years had a Friday the 13th in certain months because they stopped using the phrase Friday the 13th in the title of the films. This one is just called Jason Goes to Hell. It's mentioned that the cabins were torn down a few years before, and we still see them upright in 1998, so it must be at least 2001. The FBI's trap involves them using a female agent as bait to get Jason out in the open, where they open fire on him from all directions, completely blasting his body apart. Several seconds later, his still beating heart finally comes to a stop. What's left of him is transferred to the federal morgue in Youngstown, Ohio, where the coroner determines that Jason's heart is twice the size of a normal heart, and is filled with a black viscous fluid. It starts beating again as he examines it. The black liquid is a physical manifestation of the Immortality spell cast on Jason from the Necronomicon. It must be what allowed his spirit to move from Pamela to Jason, and now it would find a new host. The coroner, Phil, is possessed to eat the heart, causing fragments of Jason's soul to leave Jason's destroyed body and enter his own. I'll just call this combined entity Phil Jason, or PJ for short. But it's said that Jason won't survive in a foreign body. He'll get weaker and more prone to disease. I'm guessing he needs a body with similar DNA, which would explain why he was able to share a body with Mrs. Voorhees and why he's trying to possess someone else in his bloodline.
In a Voorhees was he born. Through a Voorhees may he be reborn.
He fights his way out of the morgue, taking a fellow coroner and a couple of mercenaries out along the way, leading to speculation about his return.
Are these men victims of a serial killer only believed to be deceased? Many say yes. Hi, I'm Robert Campbell.
Okay, calm down, Robert Campbell. You're no Rich Skidmore. Over the next week, 8 more Jason-style murders take place along the path from the morgue in Ohio to Crystal Lake in New Jersey. PJ manages to track down a waitress named Diana Kimball. Born as Diana Voorhees, this woman is Jason's half-sister who was born after their father, Elias, left his original family and started a new one with another woman. I don't know how Jason found out about her existence, but he's able to locate her outside her job at Joey B's Diner. But before he can reach her, the local deputy Josh is picked up by his girlfriend in the same parking lot. PJ overhears their plans to smash, so he smashes her head inside the car door and kidnaps Josh to be the next carrier for Jason's soul. He performs the ritual at his old childhood home, using the cliche old puking black blood into a person's mouth method of soul transference. The result is what I call Josh Jason, or JJ for short. With a fresh new body, JJ breaks into Diana's house and tries to possess her, but she's ultimately saved by her daughter's ex-husband, Stephen Freeman. Yeah, we're really scraping the bottom roots of the Voorhees family tree here. Stephen and JJ struggle against each other. JJ manages to throw a steel honing rod through Diana's back, and Stephen evens the score by stabbing him with the fire poker, causing him to stumble out the window. Diana's wound is fatal, and JJ disappears into the night, Michael Myers style. With Diana out of the picture, Jason only had 2 living relatives to potentially transfer his soul into, and he wouldn't have to look far to find either of them. Diana Kimball had 2 more relatives in her bloodline, her daughter Jessica and her infant granddaughter Stephanie. A day after killing Diana, JJ hears Jessica's TV host boyfriend, Robert Campbell, break into the Voorhees house. So he traps him and takes over his body, hoping to use it to trick Jessica. I'll obviously be calling this one RJ. When RJ finds Jessica, it's pretty funny because she's all like, "What the heck, Robert, where have you been?" And he just roars at her. I don't know why Jason roars when he's in other bodies, when he never even utilizes vocal cords at all on his own body, but I'm not gonna try to think too hard about it. Steven once again arrives to save the day, ramming his car into the possessed RJ on the way out, which is starting to become a trend on the Jason timeline. Not as much as the window breaking thing or the door smashing thing, but it is happening a lot. After coming back to life, RJ shows up at the police station. Surprisingly, he opens the door and walks inside rather than busting through it. Never mind. He easily disposes of the female cop and pins Jessica into the lockers to possess her with his snake tongue, the same way that weird couple from high school did during the passing period after Algebra 2. Thanks to a distraction from Sheriff Landis, Jessica gets a chance to escape, and aided by the sharpshooting of a handcuffed Steven, RJ is once again switched from on mode to sleep mode, which lasts for a solid 20 seconds, at which point he finds himself surrounded by cops. He bashes 2 of their heads together and scares away the third, allowing him to escape the police station and follow Jessica and Steven back to the diner, where he tears through some fat kid, goes all Gronkowski on a restaurant patron's head, goes all McDonald's fry cook on a restaurant worker's head, and elbows the restaurant owner's mouth permanently shut, which honestly, kinda deserved. That lady was annoying. He nearly gets to Jessica again, but this time she literally slips through his fingers when he's shot in the leg and absolutely skewered with this metal rod by this random badass waitress. Unfortunately for her, she suffers the same fate when he grabs her and pulls her through the same metal rod. Like the earlier moment against the lockers, I really don't know if this is supposed to be an innuendo or not. It's well established that Jason wants to punish any expression of sexuality to the point that it's kind of become a running joke, so incorporating innuendos into his kills for comedic effect doesn't seem too far-fetched. However, this does seem to suck out the last of RJ's energy, and he collapses. At some point, he switches bodies again, taking over a police officer named Randy. I'll call him RJ2. He shows up at the Voorhees house, where he speaks for the first time in order to try to trick Jessica.
Freeze! Get the hell away from Red!
This is another perplexing decision. Was Jason not able to speak in his old body, or did he simply choose not to? If the latter is true, he really was playing the long game by staying silent for at least 23 years, saving his speech for when he needed it most. Whatever the case may be, this deception works, and Jessica attacks the sheriff, allowing RJ2 to get the baby. But before he can make any other moves, he's spoiled for a 3rd time by Steven. This guy's becoming a bigger nuisance for Jason than Tommy Jarvis. The evil escapes Randy's body in the form of this slimy lizard creature, probably representing his soul, who possesses Diana's dead body, causing him to fully transform back into the main hockey mask wearing Jason that we all know and love. I don't know why he didn't do this earlier. There's no concrete lore to explain how this is physically possible other than this throwaway line.
In a Voorhees was he born. Through a Voorhees may he be reborn.
But as I already discussed earlier, Jason, and the Friday the 13th franchise as a whole, is not about continuity and logic. It's something that's hard for me to come to terms with because my show, Horror History, is about continuity and logic. But even getting his old body back seems to be only half the battle. He does kill off the assassin, Duke, in a giant bear hug, but his new nemesis, Steven, gives him a taste of his own medicine by tackling him out a window. How does it feel, Jason? And they fight for a really long ass time, allowing Jessica to retrieve the magic dagger and magic stab Jason. We see Jason's life energy being sucked out of him into the sky, and it looks like the beams of energy get shot back down, like Jason's soul is being denied access from heaven, and a series of golem-like hands reach out from below and pull the Bane of Crystal Lake into the ground, finally banishing his soul to hell. Guess Jason's gonna be sending postcards from hell from now on. Only his cracked and eroded hockey mask remains, but even that is reclaimed by one of the demons from below. But this was no ordinary evil entity. Enter Frederick Krueger. Born in the early 1940s in Springwood, Ohio, Freddy was abused as a kid, learned to love pain as a teen, and kidnapped and killed kids as an adult, causing the Neighborhood Parents Association to get together and light him up.
We found him in an old abandoned boiler room where he used to take his kids. Took gasoline. Poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door.
But Freddy came back as a demon of dreams, and around 1975, he started to invade the nightmares of the kids whose parents ended his life 7 years earlier, using their fear to continue to fuel him in the afterlife. So, just like Jason, Freddy had a disdain for kids and teenagers, and every now and then he would re-emerge and consume more of their souls. In 2001, Freddy was defeated by his daughter, Catherine Krueger, and the town developed a system to keep Krueger from coming back by prescribing a dream suppressant drug to anyone who mentioned the Springwood slasher's name. In the summer of 2005, 4 years after Freddy's last action,
we do things around here a certain way for a reason, and that's given us 4 years of peace.
Freddy Krueger had a plan to spring back into action. Jason is trapped in a purgatory where Freddy creates the illusion of a skinny dipping girl. When Jason catches and machetes her, she shapeshifts into a series of others, each of them admitting to the crimes that they committed when they should have been washing campers at Crystal Lake. Freddy, most likely using the last reserves of his remaining power, takes the form of Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, and instructs him to wake up and go to Elm Street to strike fear into the kids now living there. This gets Jason's heart beating once more. He climbs out from the spot he was dragged under and begins his journey to Elm Street. Jason arrives at 1428 Elm Street, the current home of high school senior Laurie Campbell. He sneaks into the back door and finds a pair of teens, Gib and Trey, using the upstairs bedroom. And when Gib hops in the shower, Jason shows Trey his own version of the downward thrust, with his machete that is. Jason doesn't realize it, but the older generation thinks that Freddy Krueger has returned.
Killed in bed? Jesus. It's even the same damn house. 1428 Elm.
Thinking he's regained enough of his power, Freddy makes an attempt to kill Trey's best friend, Blake, but he hasn't yet regained enough strength, so he continues to let Jason do his thing. So he does, decapitating Blake's dad and slicing through Blake himself. The next night, the teens of Springwood hold an Ohio Skibbity Riz cornfield dance party. Well, it was an Ohio cornfield dance party, that much is true. Naturally, this was an epicenter for teenage degeneracy, which means Jason Voorhees was able to smell it from miles away and was drawn to the spot. Jason grabs some kind of pipe, and when an inebriated Gib walks away from the party, Freddy pulls her into one of his nightmare domains. But before he can finish the job in the dream world, Jason gets to her in the real world, impaling Gib and also this glow stick wearing loser who is trying to take advantage of her. And taking out the glow stick guy was kind of the third good deed that Jason's done now. I guess a broken clock really is right twice a day, or in this case 3 times. Jason yeets the rapey rave goer into the corn and proceeds to cut down 7 more victims, effectively breaking up the party faster than the cops ever could. Speaking of the cops, one of them figures out who's behind the recent killings and joins 5 of the surviving teens to try to put a stop to it. Jason follows them to Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital and busts down the door, squashing the security guard. He catches up with them in the hospital's server room, where he accidentally electrocutes himself with a missed machete strike. However, he's able to grab the cop, Stubbs, and slam him into the malfunctioning control panel. He throws Stubbs through a window before coming after Laurie, Will, and Kia. However, one of their classmates, Bill, doesn't seem to be as afraid of Jason as he should be, and upon getting closer, he realizes that it's actually Freddy, who has the power to control dreamers by making them sleepwalk in the real world.
These are my children, Jason. Go back where you belong.
So, for the first time, Jason finds that he's not necessarily the main villain of his story. It's not the first time that there have been other evil characters, like the abusive doctor in New Blood, the murderous bully Tamara aboard the Lazarus in Jason Takes Manhattan, or the disciplinarian who went too far, Mr. McCullough, but this is the first time that Jason has really been asked to share the spotlight. The way it comes about is interesting, because at that point, Jason had soundly been defeated like never before, and finds himself trapped in the underworld of hell. But Freddy is the one to unleash him, hoping to use him to regain power, not realizing he would become a dangerous rival. This is a classic tale in the horror genre, the opening of Pandora's box. The obvious example is Hellraiser, which contains a literal Pandora's box, but it goes back much further to ancient Greek mythology. These stories typically involve curiosity as a catalyst for horror being unleashed. There's an interesting parallel in Freddy vs. Jason because the human characters have opened a box of their own. Those who have had their dreams crashed by Freddy Krueger have been relocated to this psych ward where they administer a dream suppressant medication for their own protection, and the protection of everyone in town. But by digging into what they see as some kind of sinister cover-up, they're actually opening themselves up to Freddy's return. They're opening Pandora's box. In the original Greek mythos, the box is said to contain all of the evils and misfortunes of the world, which would escape when opened, leaving only hope inside. The trope has evolved over the years, often conflating the evils in the box with demons and hell, making Jason's escape from hell to attack the one who set him free a literal interpretation of a classic story. Jason is injected with 2 syringes full of Imobatine, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a tranquilizer that immobilizes you, using the last of his time to cut Bill in half before passing out. But this doesn't matter much to Freddy, who can freely move from dream to dream. His next destination would be Jason himself. In Jason's dream, his mother scolds him for disobeying her, saying he was supposed to return home after killing a few teens. Eventually, he realizes that it's Freddy Krueger, using the form of his mother in the dreamscape. Jason cuts off both of Freddy's arms, but they grow back. The two do battle, with Freddy taking advantage of his manipulation of dream physics to send Jason flying in a way that no one else really has before. Of course, Freddy infamously air humps Jason across the room and drops a water tank on it, but Jason just refuses to die like Freddy's usual victims. However, when he turns the tables by tossing Krueger into a pipe, it bursts open, creating a waterfall between the two, but Jason can't bring himself to cross it. Jason appears to have a crippling fear of water, but many have pointed out that this doesn't really make sense because he's never been shown to have a fear of the aquatic before this. The first time we saw Jason, he was jumping out from the bottom of the lake, and at one point he walked across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean after voluntarily boarding and sinking a cruise ship. I think this is a case of Freddy's manipulation amplifying his existing fear of drowning from when he was a kid. In the real world, he's invincible. He doesn't need to worry about drowning. But in his dreams, he probably still thinks that he's mortal. For example, sometimes I have a dream where I'm still in school, even though I'm clearly not. But in the dream, I just accept it. Or I'll have dreams that include people that I haven't talked to in years, but I don't question it. So Jason thinks that he's mortal in the dream, and he has a reason to fear water again.
So you are afraid of something after all.
Freddy makes it rain, which paralyzes Jason in fear, making him revert to the 11-year-old Jason who drowned in the lake. Freddy also taunts him with the decapitated head of his mother. Freddy wants to dig deeper into Jason's fears, so he digs into Jason's subconscious to get inside of another dream. This one involves Jason at a foggy lake, dragging victims to a cabin, kind of like the one where he made his shrine in 1984, but not quite the same. He then goes deeper still, to a dream about Jason's last day alive in 1957. But when the kids throw him into the lake, Freddy pulls him down further, trying to finish off his new rival once and for all. As Freddy and Jason do battle in the dream world, Laurie, Kia, Will, and Charlie tie up Jason and load him into their van, planning to drive him home to Crystal Lake, thinking he'll have no reason to return to Springwood. But when their injections of Imobatine wear off, Jason escapes his nightmare with Krueger and springs to life, causing the van they're traveling in to crash somewhere near Crystal Lake. The kids take cover in a cabin. I guess not all the cabins were demolished. There were always multiple camps along the lake. When Jason finds them, he busts through the wall and knocks over a gas can and lantern, igniting a massive fire. He ends up getting his blade stuck in the table, so the kids get away, but he does get a pretty good lick in on Kia. Charlie takes a shot too, which later proves to be fatal. Freddy Krueger is pulled out of the dream world by Laurie, and Jason is there, finally ready to fight his new rival on his own domain, reality. Cue the metal. It's Jason's strength versus Freddy's agility, but without the ability to manipulate the environment, Jason is superior, and ends up throwing him across the camp through the roof of another cabin and has to search the area to find him again. When he does, he discovers Freddy in a verbal confrontation with Kia, who he sneaks up behind to shut her up. They once more do hand-to-hand combat. Freddy launches gas canister torpedoes at him, showers him with building stakes, bludgeons him with a cement mixer, and rams him with a supply cart. But Jason's will to carry on is unrelenting. Their battle takes them to the dock, which Laurie sprays with gasoline, and using a torch from the nearby fire, she sends the whole area up in flames. The distraction allows Jason to pull his opponent's arm off just before the nearby propane tanks blow, sending both crashing into the lake in a fury of flame. Historically, the attack is significant for both of them, since Freddy originally lost his life in a hell of flames, and Jason lost his under the crystal clear waters of the lake. Freddy makes it back to the dock to get his revenge on the last two survivors, Laurie and Will, but Jason uses the last of his power to stick Freddy's own arm through him before collapsing into the lake. The last Laurie sees of him are his eyes closing before sinking down into the black water. But at some point, Jason rises again with Freddy's head in tow, though it could be argued that this was a dream. For Freddy, that was basically the end of the line, chronologically at least. But for Jason, as we know, dying in the real world doesn't have much consequence, and he would resurface a few short years later. In 2008, Jason was captured and executed again.
We executed him for the first time in 2008.
This line confused me the first time that I saw it, because as we know, Jason was blown up by the government for the first time in the early 2000s. So I think she means her facility executed him for the first time in 2008. They tried several different methods to put him down, including electrocution, gas, a firing squad again, hanging again. They eventually decided that they couldn't kill him, but the best they could do was contain him using cryogenic stasis and try to figure out what to do later. I would have maybe mixed him into a pool of cement, but I guess they had other ideas. The cryostasis freezer was manufactured in 2010.
Probably a cryostasis unit. I'd guess early port series. KM?
Quadport 11. Manufactured in 2010, precise historic records are inconsistent.
And it's likely that this freezer was created just to contain Jason, so they created the freezer and planned to use it immediately. Jason is locked up and sedated, but before the cryostasis operation is carried out, there's some disagreement about what should be done with him. Certain parties are interested in studying his ability to regenerate damaged tissue. Those who are paying attention at home will notice that this is a new ability Jason has gained since coming back from hell. Before, we saw his injuries build up, and his original body deteriorated from 1979 to 1998. But during the argument about a potential Jason relocation, the man himself somehow got out of the chains and locked up the security guard in his place. He comes out of the dark and assaults the mercenaries, using what I believe is one of those leash poles as both a bat and a throwing spear, and throwing one other guy through a door. He leaves at least 8 victims, and the last employee is a woman named Rowan LaFontaine, the project leader. She runs down to the cryogenic freeze chamber that they were initially planning on freezing him with. When Jason follows her down a level, he sees the chamber door open and he investigates, thinking she's hidden in there. But when he gets close, she bombards him with a shotgun and shoots some kind of explosive tank to blast him into the freeze room. Ironically, this is a trick that Jason has used in the past, being turned against him. I still stand by my Jason is not stupid thesis though. Of course he's not going to know what a cryogenic freeze chamber is. The dude was born in the 1940s and spent the last 3 decades either dead, trapped, or scavenging in the woods. He wouldn't have any understanding of technology. Despite her trap working, Rowan isn't expecting just how strong he is. He penetrates her through the door of the chamber, causing the computer to send the surrounding room into emergency lockdown, likely a countermeasure programmed in just for Jason. Unfortunately for Rowan, this means that she's getting frozen with him, and nobody ever comes to check on this. I guess she was the last employee who knew about this project and had no family, or whoever did know just didn't care. So the two stayed there, literally frozen in time. In 2024, the sport of hockey was outlawed.
It's a hockey mask. Very good, Senaron.
What's a hockey mask? Facial armor. Used in a sport outlawed in 2024.
So congratulations Panthers fans, guess you guys got the last one. Over the next several centuries, the Earth became uninhabitable due to pollution and extreme weather, to the point that the oceans and soil could no longer sustain life. At some point, a moon colony is established and abandoned. In the 2350s, the science of human reanimation entered its early stages, laying the groundwork for what would happen about 100 years later, when a college class of explorers would discover Jason's cryo unit.
I love this part.
The year was 2455 when Professor Lowe and his students came across 2 perfectly preserved human life forms on a field trip exploring the old Earth.
But when the cryo unit ruptured, you didn't escape it. It put you into stasis.
For how long?
The year is 2455.
I know what you may be thinking. If Jason was frozen in 2010, the earliest date that he could have been frozen, and he was down there for 4.5 centuries.
Any idea how long she's been down?
4.55 centuries.
Then 2010 plus 455 years elapsed would be 2465, not 2455. However, it's never stated that Earth 2 has the same solar cycle as Earth Prime. In other words, if a year on Earth 2 lasts 372 days compared to the 365-day calendar on Earth 1, then this discrepancy actually makes sense. As Jason slowly thaws out, he falls forward and his blade chops off a student's arm. Even when he's in stasis, Jason is still chopping up teenagers. However, an android assisting the researchers, Knowledge Matrix 14, also known as KM-14, is able to use modern tech to save him, and even save his arm. Both Jason and Rowan are recovered and moved to their ship, the Grendel.
Specimen 4420 found in Sector 3930L on Earth Prime.
Maybe with everyone that was ever alive during his initial rampages now long gone, Jason's rage would have subsided, left behind with the old Earth. Only human nature hasn't changed. The students who are supposed to be reanimating him are flirting and paying more attention to each other than the procedure at hand.
Smart and sexy.
This is the exact same situation that started the Jason saga 508 years ago. The camp counselors who should have been saving Jason's life are spiritually succeeded by the scientists who should have been saving Jason's life. Rowan is the first to wake up.
But you're gonna be safe here. You're aboard Grendel, a Class 4 catamaran transport ship.
2455. That's over 400 years.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself. When Professor Lowe finds out that his new specimen is a famous serial killer, he becomes dead set on preserving him and cashing in on the discovery of the oldest known human. So, Jason soon finds himself on a second voyage, this one a space voyage rather than a sea voyage. But there are still a lot of similarities to his original cruise on the Lazarus. Outside of the general concept of a bunch of students on a school-sponsored trip, there are specific reoccurrences, like a girl named Janessa bringing a bottle of wine to her professor so they can talk about her midterm, just like Tamara did during the Manhattan trip to try to improve her final grade. One of the students removes Jason's mask, giving us one last look at his face. His skin isn't great after 445 years of freezer burn, but he has more teeth and looks more human because of the whole regeneration thing. Jason's reanimation happens while all the students are off having sex in their rooms. It may just be a coincidence, but it's almost as if this wills him back to life so he can kill them. His first victim was the teacher's assistant, Adrienne, who he wrestles into a liquid nitrogen freezer and smashes her then frozen face on the table in what is probably my favorite Jason kill of them all due to the creativity of it. He finds this futuristic medical tool that looks a lot like a machete, so he grabs it. In another similarity to his NYC voyage, an emergency announcement goes out, and he goes to one of the cabins where he kills a student named Stoney. As Jason is dragging his body away, his half-naked girlfriend, Kinsa, escapes. And just like the group of students who tried to hunt him down on the Lazarus, the Grendel has an onboard team of security soldiers who set out to kill the hostile roaming in their ship. But the law enforcement figures in the 2400s aren't any more successful than the ones in the 1900s. Jason goes into a training simulator room where he appears to kill an alien and 2 human soldiers, but soon finds it was only a hologram. After the holographic imagery is disabled, he sees the real soldiers, breaks the back of one, and smashes the other into a wall. The important takeaway here, though, is that he's now familiar with the futuristic concept of simulated environments. We'll come back to this. Next, he sneaks into the back end of the ship, and he's about to kill off one of the engineers, but the onboard security brigade arrives and opens fire on him with 3 high-tech automatic weapons. But with sparks and debris flying everywhere, Jason somehow gets away in the chaos and hides in a closet, allowing him to stealth kill 2 more security personnel, the second of which is tossed from an overhead lookout area into some screw-shaped machinery down below, a direct parallel to the kid that he impaled in the ship's antenna in 1998.
Sarge, we found Condor.
What's his condition?
He's screwed.
After taking advantage of the dark environment to capture and kill 2 more comrades, only the sergeant remains. Jason pulls out an old favorite by busting through the wall to strangle him and stab 2 spikes through the wall, seemingly putting the leader of the security unit down. He reaches the cockpit just as the ship is about to pull into a space station for assistance and splatters the pilot's blood on the console, causing the spacecraft to just plow through the station.
Whoopsie daisy.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself again. With the armed guards all taken care of and no space station for the students to escape to, Jason turns his attention towards them. However, it seems he's finally met with a door he can't break down while trying to smash into the lab where all of the survivors are hiding. This is not a problem for him though. He has a preferred method of entry. Everyone flees but Professor Lowe, too blinded by the monetary value that Jason represents. Running away would be leaving money on the table, so he tries to reason with him. Jason sees the original machete that he brought with him through stasis, and Lowe, temporarily deluded into thinking that's all Jason wanted, gives it to him. But trying to make friends with Jason works about as well for him as it has everyone else who's ever attempted it. The Crystal Lake Killer doesn't wait long before putting his old tool to good use. He brings along Lowe's head to, I don't know, use as a prop to scare his next victim, who Jason forces into some kind of high voltage machine, electrocuting him. Much like Wayne from the Lazarus. But unfortunately for the survivors on board the Grendel, their attempt to get away in a lifeboat, or in this case, escape shuttle, proves to be futile. When Jason finds them in the shuttle bay, it appears they have nowhere left to run. As the unfrozen Rowan was cornered along with two students, Janessa and Waylander, it seemed there was no hope for them until the roboticist Suneron and his android creation, KM-14, stepped through the pod bay door. Unfazed, Jason throws his machete at the fembot, burying it into her torso. However, when he goes to retrieve it, he's in for a surprise.
Gotcha.
For the first time, Jason finds himself truly outmatched by her computer-level accuracy, lightning-quick movements, and machine-powered strength. Everyone always praises Interstellar for its accuracy to real-life robotics by cartwheeling for maximum speed, but let's not forget that Jason X did it first. KM even gives Jason a big taste of his own medicine by firing a series of shots into the panel behind him so she can send him through the wall with a high kick. KM's thorough beatdown appears to put any chances of Jason simply reviving himself again out of reach by blowing off his arm, his leg, and finally his head. But by some act of horrible luck, or maybe something more, Jason's body is left lying in the medical rejuvenation lab. And seemingly unprompted, the computer comes to life and begins scanning Jason's body for injuries. You can't help but wonder if this is somehow the work of Pamela Voorhees, or the Necronomicon magic cast by her so many years ago, now intervening to bring her boy back to life from beyond the grave once more. Personally, I have to believe that the lightning that once struck twice in the same spot to revive Jason, the forces that brought his body back from complete destruction, and whatever activated the seemingly idle rejuvenation machine are one and the same. The same microbots that repaired the injuries of two of Jason's victims during the voyage are deployed to repair him. But instead of just closing him back up with human tissue, the bots create something else entirely. The half-man, half-machine, hulking menace commonly referred to as Uber Jason. The use of machine parts to continue living is a long-standing trope in fiction, dating back to Darth Vader in Star Wars, but also including Raiden in Metal Gear Solid, Alita in Alita Battle Angel, and Clockwork in Sly Cooper. They all have one thing in common: leaning on technology to extend their lives so they can continue dealing eternal hatred. As much as I had fun doing the whole postcard gimmick, I imagine even Jason has to give up on writing to his mom at this point, considering that her entire planet is now dead. But if he had sent one last message through some kind of interplanetary delivery service, it would have told about his second battle with KM-14. But this time, in a fair fight, machine versus machine, she's unable to do even the smallest amount of damage. It's part of an evolution we've seen throughout Jason's history. Each version is more and more unstoppable than the last. The battle does allow the humans to escape the bridge. Everyone but Waylander, that is, who stays back to blow up each of the bridges connecting to the main part of the ship, part of their plan to sever themselves from the impending core implosion. Realizing he doesn't stand a chance to survive, he blows up the corridor with him and Jason still in it, hoping this noble final act would save his friends. With that, it finally seems to be over. But this Jason is an amplified version of every previous iteration, and it's not just his physical strength that is cranked up, but also his relentless nature. Somehow, Uber Jason held on to the severed side of the ship after the explosion, and he punches through the steel to create an explosive depression. Those end up being Janessa's iconic final words before she's vacuumed out into space. The others have to abandon yet another compartment of the already greatly reduced ship, yet another connection to the escape from the Lazarus, when they lost room by room when the vessel started taking on water. Uber Jason kicks down door after door in search of his prey, eventually reaching the emergency evacuation bay. Suddenly, a wave of digital artifacts sweeps across the room, and Uber Jason finds himself in a somewhat familiar environment, his quiet abode in Camp Crystal Lake. He spots one of his targets, Suneron, but his attention is drawn away when he sees a couple of underdressed camp counselors drinking, smoking, and exclaiming their love for premarital sex. I talked earlier about how Jason is easily distracted, but it doesn't matter much because he has all the time in the world to come after his main victims after completing a couple of side quests. Whether or not he knows that he's in a holographic simulation, he can't resist trying to kill these counselors who are doing the 3 things that he despises most. Jason makes quick work of these virtual counselors using the old sleeping bag slam, to call back to his iconic kill from New Blood, allowing him to turn his attention back to Suneron. By this point, the ship is imploding all around him, and Suneron and Rowan both stagger towards the rescue vessel waiting for them at the evacuation hatch. The door closes just before Uber Jason can join them, and he's faced with Sergeant Brodsky, another brave soldier giving his life to help his fellow passengers escape. What little is left of the ship explodes in a dramatic fashion. Surely this is the end, and Jason will be whisked out into the vast nothingness of space. But by some infinitesimal chance, the blast sends Jason flying towards the rescue craft.
He's coming this way.
You've gotta be kidding me.
He isn't kidding you. Again, this feels like a coincidence that could only be caused by some kind of intervention by Pamela or the Necronomicon. Jason flies towards the rescue vehicle, but at the last second, there is a miraculous save that even Martin Brodeur or Tony Esposito would be proud of. Sergeant Brodsky deflects his shot wide left. How fitting that after 35 broken windows, Jason is finally defeated just before the one he doesn't break. Unfortunately for the hero, Brodsky, he would have to suffer a brutal fate. As Jason's last known victim, he would burn up upon entry to Earth 2's atmosphere, appearing as a shooting star to the migrated humans living on the surrogate planet. It would be a beautiful ending, but this is Jason we're talking about.
We landed in the lake.
Let's go check it out.
Live or die, the story of Jason Voorhees ends with a mask sinking into a lake, suggesting that the boy who terrified Alice Rand, the man who rampaged through counselor training centers, remote cabins, summer camps, cruise ships, crossover events, and even spacecrafts may one day surface again. Or perhaps the implication is that we've come full circle and the whole story will repeat itself on another planet. I've now gone through and analyzed over 17 hours of Jason's adventures, sorted out the complete Jason Voorhees timeline, and learned what there is to learn about horror's most iconic goaltender. And I'm now left with one question. Is the character of Jason Voorhees really any good? This has been one of my most requested topics over the last few years, and I guess it took this long because the whole point is to analyze the character, but that's not easy to do with a character like Jason, who doesn't have much character at all. He's more of a vehicle to tell other stories. The franchise has had 11 different directors, all trying to impose their own ideas. Friday the 13th is a simple story about taking responsibility and revenge, as Pamela gets back at the irresponsible counselors who allowed her boy to die. Part 2 is about urban legends and survival, as it's discovered that the stories about Camp Crystal Lake's jinx may actually be true. Part 3 is a story of shame and coping with low self-esteem, as Jason takes the iconic mask from Shelly, who similarly is outcast from his friend group. Part 4 highlights the strength of family, with Tommy and Trish Jarvis sticking together to overcome certain death and Robert out to avenge the death of his sister. A New Beginning doesn't have Jason in it, but it's about trauma in life after tragedy. Jason Lives is about the concept that history cannot be changed or erased, reflected in the contrast between the many attempts to erase the past and the enduring legacy of Jason Voorhees. New Blood is about metaphorical rebirth, with both Tina and Jason trying to harness their old powers to overcome one another. Jason Takes Manhattan is about finding one's way in the world, highlighting the stories of high school characters who break away from the expectations sent by their parents or guardians throughout the story. Jason Goes to Hell, I guess, is about how evil comes in many forms, including a boyfriend who is using Jessica for fame, and Jessica having to lean on someone who truly cares about her in order to survive. Freddy vs. Jason is a classic Pandora's box story, where Freddy tries to use Jason to regain power, not realizing what he's let loose, while the human characters try to fight the system in their town, only to realize that the system was keeping them safe all along. Jason X uses Jason as a vehicle for a classic science fiction story that's still relevant today. As Dr. Ian Malcolm put it in Jurassic Park, scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. There are 11 unique stories here, and Jason tends to be among the least interesting character in each of them. Sure, we get bits of lore here and there, and there is an overall message about a boy whose low self-esteem turned him into a serial killer, and a message about controlling your vices, but he mostly remains a blank slate, more of a stage for the individual ideas that I just listed to stand on. So as a character, no, I don't think he's very interesting. But I think there's a reason that Jason Lives is generally seen as the most beloved entry in the franchise. Because Jason Lives understands that Jason Voorhees isn't the paint, he's the canvas. A cyclical horror that comes around every some odd years. A force that cannot be buried no matter how much you try to move past him. Like the pseudo-holiday Friday the 13th, superstition and urban legends are a part of human nature, and no amount of changing the signs and altering the names are going to change what happens when the mask goes on, the machete comes out, and the sun sets on Crystal Lake. And on that note, why don't we tally up the kills? Jason Voorhees broke 35 windows during his movies, averaging out to a broken window every 28.85 minutes. I'll give the window pane of pain for coolest window break to Friday the 13th Part 2 for the classic jump scare that first introduced us to maskless Jason. And I'll give the sugar glass shard for lamest break to the shower shattering from Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter, which doesn't feel very destructive in comparison to his other work. Make sure you remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell and select all notifications, and I will see you in the next one if we survive.
If we survive?
Assuming we both survive.